war in China, revolution in Nicaragua, bandits in Mexico, gang war in Chicago, mere firecrackers in the jaw of the mighty cannon that will sound throughout Arizona today. You guessed it, the baseball season opens today, screamed the advertisement in the state's largest newspaper, the Arizona Republican. That's right, in 1928. After 13 years of town ball and outlaw leagues, local leaders proudly waved the flag of legitimacy and declared thousands of cheering fans will be given the opportunity to give it a royal send-off on the 1928 stretch with games in Phoenix and Tucson. Before the crowds filled the Phoenix's Riverside Park to watch the local Senators play the Bisbee Bees at noontime parade with the 158th Infantry Band led both teams through the streets of downtown Phoenix. In Tucson, a crowd of 1,500 to 2,000 spilled over the city's new stadium, Randolph Park, all yelling the well-known welkin ring with the old Pueblos war whoop, rooting for Tucson's Cowboys to win the opening game against the Miami Miners. Before the first day's cheers had begun, the Arizona State League president, Paul Davis, boldly declared, bigger attendance already is indicated, and the fans will see no Class D league in the country. So I wanted to open with that because here we are, almost 100 years since those headlines in the Arizona Republic. And they were crazy for baseball, and they weren't just crazy for baseball in Arizona to be a legitimate professional league, even if it was the lowest division, the D-class league. They now had professional baseball back in Arizona. And not just spring training, not barnstorming teams, but Arizona now had a league of its own. And that meant they were right up there where every other major city, small town, rural America that had a baseball team that was playing professional players. Baseball has been an important part of our culture here in Arizona and the American Southwest for a very long time. And today we're going to have a great discussion about it, and we're going to talk a great deal today about professional game. And I want to give you a little preview of why we're going to do that. When I was writing my dissertation at ASU called Diamonds in the Desert in the mid to late 90s, when you go out and around Arizona, and we have a baseball historian in the audience here, former executive director Fred Vail, whose actually grandfather played in the dead ball era in one of the first great World Series for the Pittsburgh Pirates, right? Bucky Vail, am I right? That's right. So we all come to the table today here excited about baseball. We have our own personal experiences, our family experiences. It could be we played baseball, our fathers, our grandfathers did, played softball, played in Little League, or had our favorite teams growing up for them. But how did baseball come to Arizona as the professional game? And as I did my research, as I traveled across the state of Arizona, I'd meet people from Bisbee to Douglas to Globe to Prescott to Jerome to Phoenix to Tucson, and they'd say, well, what are you writing about? Are you writing about softball? You know, my grandmother played for a great team in Phoenix in 1938. No, not writing about softball, but you're right. Softball is really important to the people of Arizona. What about Little League? You know, Little League started in Prescott. Aren't you writing about Little League? No, I can't write about every level of baseball in the state of Arizona, but I can tell you that as you travel this state and you listen to people talk about their stories and how important baseball or softball or Little League, soft pitch, fast pitch, semi-pro, town team, high school team, there is a flavor and a passion for the game. And what's interesting about baseball right now is it's having a resurgence as minor league teams. As people can't afford to go to the big cities, baseball has found is bringing small town and minor league baseball back to America. And there's been a growth in minor league baseball. And even in the Phoenix area, the Arizona Fall League, there's a rookie league that plays down in the valley. And so if you really like baseball, there's even in the summertime, you can go down to the fields in Talking Stick Fields down there on the Salt River Reservation, and they have a small rookie league down there where they're developing players. So Arizona's had a great history of baseball. So we're going to step back in time a little bit here. This is a great team from Prescott and the turn of the century. Let's go to our next page here and talk about a big event that we are celebrating this spring in Arizona. So 25 years ago, the Arizona Diamondbacks won the World Series. And the story we're going to talk about today is going to circle back to the D-backs, right? Because Arizona is the 48th star on the flag, right? We're the last state before Alaska and Hawaii. And baseball was the national pastime. In 1912, the major leagues have been playing the World Series for well over a decade. We've had professional teams since the Cincinnati Reds in 1969. The National League was formed in 1876. And Arizona had, we did have a championship softball team in the out of the Phoenix area. But the Suns could never put it over the line. The Sun Devils could never put it over the line. And the Diamondbacks became our first world championship team. And I interviewed Jerry Colangelo 5 years ago for the 20th anniversary for a Phoenix Magazine article, the 20th anniversary of the D-backs. And he told me a story. He grew up on the south side of Chicago, and he talked about the year that the Suns took the Bulls, to the edge, and the Suns were trying to win the NBA championship. He said he was sitting in the stands, and he was taking a break from the Bulls' run and the Suns' run for championship, and had gone to a Cubs game. And he was sitting in the outfield, and he might have been sitting, right behind home plate. But he talked about sitting in the ballpark at Wrigley and how he thought that Arizona deserved a professional Major League Baseball team. With all its history and heritage, with the heritage of the people who lived in Phoenix, with all their Midwestern roots, he wanted to bring a team to Phoenix. And they had tried for many years. There was talk at one point of other teams moving to Phoenix. So he came back and he used all the pressure and connections he had to get the Diamondbacks into the National League. It was important that they were a National League team. He was a Cubs fan. And the Diamondbacks brought the championship home to not only Phoenix, but to Arizona, a state that we will discover, a territory where baseball had started playing, where they started playing baseball here at least as early as 1866. How does baseball get to Arizona? How do we get to the Diamondbacks winning the World Series championship? Well, in the 1840s and 1850s, we have the rise of the amateur sports. I had a conversation with my son about this the other night, and we were talking about how the Olympics have become so professionalized. We were talking about how we won the great hockey match over the Canadians. We won the gold medal. And I said, there's been a lot of changes in my life, son, in which only amateurs played in the Olympics. And the great Jim Thorpe had to give up his gold medals because he had needed to make some extra money and play a professional game of baseball. Alexander Cartwright and his Knickerbocker Ball Club, this is actually a scorecard from the New York Digital Library from April 17th, 1846. It was a men's amateur game, but very soon baseball spread. It was a great game of leisure, but men started playing the game. This is Doc Adams. He helped write some of the first rules of baseball. So pre-Civil War, you have a rise in the game of baseball. It's not professionalized, but you're starting to see the competition between towns and cities and the rise of the game. With the rise of baseball, it's popular in the urban areas and the Northeast especially, Boston and New York, Philadelphia, up and down the East Coast. Soon after the Civil War started and prisoners were taken south to Civil War prisons, this is actually an illustration from a baseball game in 1862 in Salisbury Prison in Salisbury, North Carolina. And so we know that a lot of Union soldiers in their long days in Confederate prisons, one of their leisure activities was baseball. And it's an important moment in the history of baseball because when players are in prison, everybody's equal. Everybody's playing the game. It's not just a gentleman's game, not just a college game. It's becoming more of an immigrant's game, a blue-collar game. When I did my research on baseball in the 90s, pre-newspapers.com, before so much had been digitized, in my stretch going through microfilm and the newspapers, I had located what I thought was the earliest published game in Arizona. And I'll show you, and that was in 1872. But I've discovered recently, right there at the top line. Can you read that? A baseball club has been formed in Prescott, June 13th, 1866. So what do we have right next door to us right here? Fort Whipple, right? You've got former soldiers of the Union Army, former soldiers of the Confederate Army. You have men that have come out here and they're settling in the West, and they have some leisure time and they bring their competition with them, their competition between New York and Boston. We got somebody here from Boston in the back here. And so I'm still searching for more information on this, but it tells you that baseball had come west. I haven't found yet any records yet of baseball played before the Civil War in Arizona, maybe down at Yuma or Fort Buchanan. But we know when I showed you Alexander Cartwright went on a very famous tour of America in the late 1840s. He took baseball to San Francisco, he took baseball to Hawaii, and there's three names that come up in the early baseball: Cartwright, Spalding, and Doubleday. And there's lots of information that's been written on all three of them. The most recent information I've read, some people question Cartwright, but there's more question on Doubleday. We know that Doc, the gentleman I mentioned earlier, helped write some of the early rules of baseball, created the position of shortstop. But we know that Cartwright was one of the first Johnny Appleseeds of baseball, taking it west from Cincinnati to San Francisco and then to Hawaii. The game of baseball in Arizona, it's very interesting to understand its growth here in the territorial days. The first game, it's not reported until January of 1873, but they report a baseball game played at Fort Grant, Old Fort Grant, on Christmas Day, 1872. Until the rise of amateur football in the early decades of the 20th century, baseball is a very popular Christmas Day game, especially in the warmer climes of the Southwest, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California. And you find all across Arizona territory, the territories out west in the late 19th century, that baseball is a very popular 4th of July game, or you'll have a baseball game at a dedication of some big new event, maybe a dam or et cetera. Here, this is a very famous photograph of, does anyone recognize this? This is the plaza, and it's Gurley and Montezuma. And the Baseball Trail Committee out of Scottsdale, which recently had a small exhibit here, they are very interested in petitioning the city of Prescott and developing a plaque for downtown that will be dedicated to this game in May of 1876. So it's the 150th anniversary of this match held right on the plaza. And there's all these legendary rumors that there were Red Sox players, which doesn't make any sense because it's May. But we know that the Reds also traveled as the Red Stockings, and we know that the Red Stockings were playing in San Francisco in the late 1870s. So they're still doing research on this, but it was a legendary game right down on Gurley and Montezuma. Albert G. Spalding. Now, we talk a lot about the importance of American cultural icons touring the world. We know that in this era, Buffalo Bill's Wild West is touring the world. He's bringing the Western American culture around the world. And and Albert Spalding took a baseball club on tour around the world in 1889. It was becoming the national pastime here, and it was welcomed all around the world as he toured. Now let's talk a little bit about the rise of baseball in Arizona. So between 1866 and 1909, as communities are growing across the state of Arizona, actually the territory of Arizona, many of the small towns across the community start forming baseball teams. A mayor can call a mayor, a base commander can call a mayor or, town, hey, let's put a match together. Hey, we've got a 4th of July game, we've got a New Year's game, Christmas game, and rivalries began to develop. Up here in northern Arizona, teams developed in Jerome, they developed in Clarkdale, Flagstaff, Williams, Prescott. There was great competition in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s here in northern Arizona. The Warren Ballpark in Bisbee was built in 1909. There are 2 other ballparks that compete with Warren Ballpark as the longest continuous ballparks. One is in Birmingham, Alabama, but the Bisbee ballpark is still used to this day, and in 1917 it became notoriously known for the deportation of the miners in the IWW Wobbly strike, in which the miners were all gathered in the ballpark and then put on in boxcars and taken out somewhere between Douglas and El Paso and left in the desert. Side note on baseball history. Now, why is 1909 so important to the rise of baseball in the West? Well, one of the things that's developing in the late 19th and early 20th century is the greatest railroad network in the history of the United States. Sometime just after World War I, maybe in the 20s, before the U.S. highways are built, which we're about to celebrate the centennial of this fall with U.S. Highway 89 and 66 and the U.S. Highway Act, the railroads were the way to travel. And the baseball clubs had the National League and the American League at the turn of the 20th century had developed their spring training sessions to warm up. It was too cold in the Northeast. The farthest western team was the St. Louis Cardinals. Everybody else was up still there in the ball clubs, the 16 ball clubs of the American National League were all up in our northern cities. So they went to Texas, they went to Florida, Louisiana, they went to California, and California started attracting a lot of a good chunk of the major league teams. They also knew that there was a set of colleges that had good ball clubs, and they were developing minor league baseball. So the Chicago White Sox, and it's interesting that the state of Arizona over the decades never really thought about recruiting them. It's really about making a financial deal, a business deal. But it's interesting that Bill Veeck never brought the White Sox once he owned them to Arizona, because the White Sox have a very rich heritage of playing baseball in Arizona. And this is where we come to the point where we're going to talk really about professional baseball in Arizona. The Cubs were on the West Coast, the White Sox, the Pirates arrived in the 20s, the Red Sox were out there. Different teams would come and go. The Browns would choose, let's go play in California. But the White Sox and the Cubs were there early. And in 1909, the White Sox realized that, they've noticed that these post-World Series barnstorming teams are coming together after the season and traveling east to west. And they said, why don't we stop, make a little money, spread a little goodwill, and gain some fans? And Arizona had a great baseball tradition, very competitive. And the mine owners all across Arizona realized very early as they started forming mining town teams, or in towns like Prescott with Fort Whipple or Fort Huachuca or Camp Naco, all across the state. If you had ball clubs in your mining towns and you could create competition, it was also an alternative to vice and late night activities that they would rather not have their miners involved in. And so one of the reasons you find all across America, you find blue collar corporations investing in sports teams, your mining town teams love to have baseball teams. And as you can see here, anybody been to Comiskey Field, Old Comiskey in Chicago? Everybody? I had one chance to go to Old Comiskey, and it was a great experience. And Comiskey, of course, is like Wrigley. They've got the Cubs and the White Sox on the West Coast. Comiskey was quite the P.T. Barnum of baseball. And in 1909, he sends his people out ahead, and there's a dam they're going to dedicate down there at the end of March 1909, and 1,000 people show up for $300. The winning team takes on. They paid the White Sox $300 to stop in Yuma and play baseball. It's the first known professional team to stop in Arizona, a Major League Baseball team, and play here. And then they stop in Tucson, and everyone starts paying attention. And soon enough, you start seeing city boosters wanting Major League Baseball teams to stop in their towns. What does this also do, right? What's happening in springtime in Arizona? A lot of us are talking about the weather right now. I call this we're experiencing early spring in Phoenix and Prescott today. I mean, it's so beautiful out there. It's just not the norm. Well, for boosters in Tucson and Phoenix and Mesa, if you're playing baseball in the spring, remember the Southern Pacific and the Santa Fe Railroad, Fred Harvey, where Southern Pacific has Sunset Magazine, they are wanting to boost people to come out and stay in Arizona, come out and spend part of their winters here, to travel out here and stay in the hotels. The story is not new. So they stopped in Tucson that same tour back in 1909. This is a photograph here of some boys, the pickup game in an urban area. This is the World Series, the New York Giants and the Athletics, 1911. And it's the rise of the national game before World War I is becoming very, very popular. And that popularity is spreading all across the American Southwest. And there are some of the earliest professional teams in the Southwest, minor league teams, start to show up in New Mexico, Colorado, Texas. But Arizona does not get a professional minor league team until 1915. Jack McCloskey, who founded the Texas League, comes to Arizona like a Pied Piper and forms the Rio Grande Association in 1915. And they play at Riverside Park down on the Salt River. And it was also well-known places for dancing and swimming and just about everything you could do. Then people are starting to bet on baseball. This is 1915. The White Sox, very famous. The White Sox come through there, and they stop. And it's every newspaper you read across the board in Arizona, but also Chicago, where it's being covered back east. And so baseball, growth of baseball in Arizona is big for Arizonans, and it's also big for the rest of the country. Right here you can see they're announcing, await the coming of baseball. Tucson, El Paso, Bisbee, Douglas, Silver City, and Albuquerque in what is to be called the Rio Grande League. Anyone guess why we haven't heard much about the Rio Grande Association League? Anybody understand that they started playing baseball in March and April, right? 1915? What happens in between March and July wearing wool uniforms? One, I know the ball players. I interviewed Thornton Lee when he played for the 1929 Globe Bears. All the players had 2 jerseys, and they let one dry between innings. And they were making enough money, and they were making enough money at the box office in the Arizona State League in 1929 to keep going. But in 1915, neither the fans or the players or the managers could make it through the season. But notice this little news article right here. Winter baseball, an assured thing. Games will be arranged with Bisbee, Douglas, and Hayden. We'll start September 15th. So Arizonans, Arizona boosters, Arizona baseball fans, they're not going to give up on baseball. They know it's a moneymaker. They know it's a draw. And we step back, and I had breakfast today with a friend here in town, Jimmy Courtier, and we were talking about that Yuma game. And he said, how could 1,000 people go to Yuma for a game? I said, well, they were advertising all the way up in Phoenix. They were advertising, take the baseball train from Phoenix, take the baseball train from Tucson to Yuma for the game. And so fans came from all over. Let's go back to our P.T. Barnum of baseball, Comiskey. So, Arizona always has some interesting sidebars on its professional sports. It's rise of the sports here, and one of the most interesting pieces in Arizona baseball history is its outlaw league. So, when Comiskey and Wrigley were out there on the West Coast, and they're recruiting ball players out of the PCL and out of the colleges, including one named Chick Gandil. Chick Gandil was a kid from Minnesota who ran away from home at 14. He was from Minnesota, farm kid. He worked his way down here to Arizona, and he worked at the mines at Humboldt, and he played for the Humboldt team in 1914. The Humboldt team played Prescott and Jerome. Then he made his way down to Cananea. And he went down there, and he played some baseball in Cananea, supposedly worked for the mine as a pipe fitter, and then made his way to California. Well, remember, baseball's being run out of New York. And California is a long ways away. There's no phones, there's no internet, they're having a good time out on the West Coast, right? And Prohibition hasn't hit either. But there's a lot of card playing, there's a lot of women, there's a lot of shenanigans happening on the Pacific Coast League. And a lot of the guys, there are some very famous cases of baseball players not going to the major leagues because they know they'll always ride the bench, and they could be a star and make more money playing for the old Pacific Coast League. Well, Mr. Comiskey decides to sweeten bet with his players. And part of the scandal of 1919 is that Comiskey promised his players bonuses based on batting 300, so many home runs, so many RBIs, so many games won as a pitcher. Well, as the season went along and the White Sox were working their way to the World Series, and in those days there were no playoffs. Team of the American League, top team of the National League. Who happens to be there playing on the other side? The New York Giants. Who's playing first base for the New York Giants but the dark prince of baseball himself, Hal Chase. And Hal Chase has himself in debt. He's got a large vig he's paying off to the mafia in New York. He's got a lot running on things. He's behind on his payments, and he knows the guys who love playing out in California, regretting that they have to live through the winters of Chicago. They loved it out in California, and they're not happy with their owner. And so they throw the World Series. And they hire a new head of commissioner of baseball, and Mountain, is it Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And this gentleman throws everybody out, including Shoeless Joe Jackson, who claims innocence that he was not part of the scandal. And except for Shoeless Joe Jackson, all the players kicked out of baseball are contacted by Hal Chase, who finds himself for a little while wandering down through Mexico and then back up through Sonora. Now, what year is this now? 1920. Prohibition is the law of the land. And Hal Chase meets a man named Hal Salem, Hal Salem's father. I met my uncle Tony Silva, went to school in Bisbee with Hal Salem, whose father owned a really nice bar in Douglas and was making a lot of money from the miners before Prohibition. So a lot of these bar owners down there in Douglas are looking, and in Deming and Silver City and El Paso and Bisbee are like, what are we going to do? We're going to be out of business. Well, here comes Hal Chase. And he's like, I've got an idea. Why don't we start a baseball league down here? I'll call my friends who've been kicked out of baseball, and I bet I can convince them to come down here. And so they started the Frontier League. And it was an outlaw league. They played outside the rules of and the regulations of New York, which had a very sophisticated minor league baseball system. And the bar owners and the restaurants in the town all along the border enjoyed Frontier baseball with a lot of major leaguers. And any major leaguer in that time period, if Hal Chase read about it, if they'd been kicked out of baseball for gambling or such, they'd make their way down to the border. So we had, you've heard of border radio, but before border radio, out of Del Rio, Texas, we had border baseball. And Hal Chase, I've read some things recently that I didn't know, is that he also ended up playing up in Jerome. And but he was quite the character. He ended up dying, living out his life in Tucson. Okay, let's talk about spring training. Now, it's true. 1947 is the official beginning of the Cactus League. But remember, owners of professional baseball teams, they are always looking for somewhere new. They're looking for something to spark their team, to get them started for the year. And by 1929, the train was finally going directly to Phoenix. You didn't have to get off the Maricopa. They had a new theater, the Orpheum Theater, the Westward Ho, and the Arizona Biltmore opened that year. And the Detroit Tigers decided to make Phoenix their home for spring training in 1929. And we know the Arizona State League is forming. There's ball clubs at the local colleges, Phoenix College, Tempe Normal, U of A, and of course, now you can get on the train right there in downtown Phoenix, take it straight over to Los Angeles. And to get over to Los Angeles, the Tigers can play the ball clubs on the West Coast. And so it's a little bit of a bar bet. If anyone ever asks you who was the first team to play in the Cactus League, it's the Detroit Tigers. And they didn't have, so it was, they didn't return, but it made a last impression on the City Fathers and the Boosters of Phoenix, because what happens that fall? I mean, we have the crash, right? The stock market crash in the fall of 1929. And Phoenix in the 1920s was becoming a major tourist destination. Tucson and Phoenix had really become very sophisticated in their travel and tourism promotion with the trains and the cities back east, and Arizona's economy, just like Grace Sparks promised when she led the charge for 89 to be built right through Prescott, connecting Prescott with the National Highway Route 66 down to US 60 that takes it to Los Angeles. You can get on the train here in Prescott and take it to the Santa Fe Railroad. And I'm still to this day, I don't understand why we don't see maybe the Pirates. They play in Kingman. We don't see a team coming down here and playing in Prescott during that era. It may be the Depression. If the Depression hadn't hit, I bet you we would have seen some ball clubs stopping here in Prescott. I do know there's a spur line to Globe, and there are some spring training games on their way back east that go up to Globe. Much easier to hit Phoenix, Tucson, Globe, Miami, and Douglas, or Douglas and Bisbee on your way out of the state. But 1929 proves to Arizonans that spring ball is successful. Now, stepping back just a couple years, this is 1925, the Jerome Miners. Some of the research that I've uncovered here, and it's interesting as I have read, there's been a great deal of interest in publishing and research on baseball in the last 35 years. One of the great things that's happened, and we participated in here at Charlotte Hall Museum, that helps flatten out research for people who are interested in whatever their topic is. but baseball's a great one. The digitization programs of our newspapers at the Library of Congress and at the state level, things like newspapers.com, have really opened up a treasure trove of history. And I was very exact when I say that we have professional baseball, Arizona State League of 1928. That's when the D-Class League is authorized by the Major League Baseball's minor league system. But baseball historians really look to about 1907 and an Arizona State League that's coming and going. And I thought I had found this great story in 1909 that actually demonstrated that all these ball clubs in southern Arizona and in the desert towns were going to have a big, and they announced it for a couple months, Memorial Day Baseball Championship going to be played in Prescott. 5 or 6 teams were all going to come by train up here for a big Memorial Day matchup in 1909, and then it fizzles. But baseball remains the cornerstone of culture that, as we all talked about at the beginning, little league, fast pitch, slow pitch softball, semi-pro teams, minor teams. Here in Prescott, our Mexican-American community had a ball field right in their barrio. They're very proud of their baseball heritage here in Prescott. Baseball plays a major role in and around the state of Arizona on many levels. And Jerome had a great baseball heritage. If you take a look at the faces of these ball clubs, the one thing that we'll talk about here in a moment is the League of Nations team of the 1929 Globe Bears. The state of Arizona, like much of America, was segregated in much of its life, especially segregation of African Americans. Now, that didn't mean that they didn't play all African American or all black teams here in Arizona, but their other teams were integrated. And so in Arizona, you would find teams like the League of Nations in the Globe Bears had Hawaiian players, Pacific Asian players. They had Hispanics. They saw themselves as League of Nations because you still had so many immigrants. So they had ball players that were just right off the boat from Sweden and players from Cornwall. And as you can see, a lot of Hispanic faces on this ball club in Jerome. The Tucson Cowboys. Tucson, one of the tragedies of Major League Baseball today, and the concentration of all 15 of the teams in Arizona now playing just in Maricopa County, is that Tucson has not had a minor league team or a spring training team for many years now. When the Diamondbacks and the Rockies left, and Jerry Colangelo told me, he said, Stuart, it's not the Phoenix Diamondbacks. This is the Arizona Diamondbacks, and we're going to broadcast statewide. We're going to have a minor league team in Tucson, and we're going to spring train in Tucson because I want all the boys and girls of the state to grow up with that being their team. I know our education curator, McKenna, is from Coolidge, and I heard her and Bailey talking about as they were growing up as young girls here in Arizona, Jerry Colangelo caught them early as D-backs fans, and they were out there talking about their favorite players growing up. Now that's very important when we talk about baseball, right? That it gets passed down through generations and that people follow their teams. The Tucson Cowboys, the Tucson Waddies, they've been playing baseball in Tucson for a very long time. But currently, people need to fight to get a ball club back down there. The Bisbee Bees, here's another thing to think about. A lot of times here in Arizona, we just think about everything in very local. Arizona, we're just the 48th state, the baby state. We're just struggling hard just to become a territory, to become a state. Well, the leaders of our state were thinking much bigger, right? They needed to connect Arizona to the national economy, the railroads, the highways. How are their farmers, or their ranchers, or their citrus growers, or their cotton growers, or their copper miners, or their gold miners, how are they going to make a living if they couldn't get their material out and bring new people in? Well, a lot of those big owners of those baseball teams, they had the money to come and go back and forth on their trains, and they knew Arizona had these towns like Bisbee and Globe and Douglas, right? And then Tucson and Phoenix with all kinds of winter visitors, people who needed something to do before it got so hot. Why is baseball and softball so popular in Arizona before 1958? Well, you couldn't sleep inside in the desert towns. You had to sleep outside your house. So you had a sleeping porch. You take your bed outside. You played, the indoor life wasn't emphasized. And in those mining towns, those National League and American League team owners knew if we put a team in Bisbee, if we put a team in Douglas, we put a team in Globe or Miami, those fans are going to come out. They're going to appreciate it because they work underground 12 hours a day in those mines, and they need something to entertain them. And the miners want the owners want them to go something that they have pride in. They, of course, form their own semi-pro teams. And then the Bisbee Bees were the Yankee farm team. The Globe Bears, they were the minor league team of the St. Louis Browns. The Phoenix Senators, on and on and on. Casey Stengel sent Billy Martin from the Oakland Oaks to Phoenix in 1947. So our teams here are not isolated in the minor league baseball teams. They're connected to the national game. And city fathers and city leaders can say to themselves, we're a real American city. We've got a baseball team. And you know what? Long before someone said they want an NFL team or an NBA team or a hockey team or a big college football team, the gold standard was, we've got a baseball team. And it was really important. Here's Globe, Arizona. These mining towns were isolated. People worked hard. They were proud of their communities. And they, so you can see the nickname of the Tucson team, Waddies wipe up on Florence on the way to battle with Globe. So they would even stop and play exhibition games between the towns. In 1929, here's 1946. Let me go back for a second. When I interviewed Thornton Lee, he was the gentleman of baseball. I interviewed Mr. Lee down in Tucson, did an oral history with him. And Thornton Lee was one of the only baseball players to ever play college ball, every alphabet, D, C, B, A, AA, AAA, major leagues, Chicago White Sox, all the way to the All-Star game of 1941. His son also became a Major League Baseball player. Played for the Arizona Cotton Kings, grew up in Tucson. Thornton Lee married a local girl from Globe. I interviewed a few other men who married local girls. Some just stayed. Ozzie Wigman stayed in Globe and ran the theater, like his father-in-law did. Well, Thornton Lee came back, went all the way back down after the Major Leagues. Boop, boop, boop. Came back to Arizona, where his wife was from, raised his son in Arizona, and became a coach of the C-class Globe Bears after World War II. Now, what's interesting about Mr. Lee when I got to sit down and talk to him, if you love baseball, he said, see those cleats over there on the wall? Those are my kangaroo cleats. And they were still in pretty good shape. This is the early 1990s when I interviewed him. And he said, we only had one field in Arizona in 1929 that had grass, and that was in Tucson. The rest of them were scratch diamonds. And he said, I was lucky as a pitcher because there was more than one of me, but if you were a position player, you were in charge of your section of the rocks. And the same went for everybody else. He said, in Globe, when we went down the hill to Miami, they would pour some hot slag just before we got there just to warm up the field for us as a welcome. He said we would drive in that Cadillac road car with our 22s. We got bored or had to change a tire. We'd shoot rabbits. And he said, I think the words he says, we got really skipping the dew out there on those dirt roads across Arizona in 1929. But, you know, he had for him, his passion for the game, which I found across the board, and I find even today, as we talk about this today, was so real. As he sat there and said, I think he and his son were two of the only men who ever struck out and gave up a home run to Ted Williams. And he was in the dugout. I'll just digress a little bit because it's a great story. He was in the dugout, sitting next to Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams during the 1941 All-Star game. And he said, Ted Williams had struck out 3 times. And they were down by 2, going into the bottom of the 9th. DiMaggio's up ahead of Ted Williams. And he said, Ted Williams couldn't shut up. He said, you got to get on base. Get a walk, DiMaggio. Get a walk, Joe. Get on base. Get on base. And Joe DiMaggio walked. They're down, the American League's down by 2. 2 outs at the bottom of the ninth in the All-Star game of 1941. Ted Williams was up to the plate and hits a home run. Does a walk-off home run and wins the All-Star game in 1941. And when he told me that story, it was as if you were right there in that dugout with Thornton Lee and that passion for the game. But just because he had gone all the way up to the All-Stars, he came back and continued coaching and playing baseball here as a player-manager in Arizona. 1930s are pretty rough on the state of Arizona. The league folds in the early 30s. Teams start to drop out. Tourism drops. We know here a lot of men are put to work building Charlotte Hall building and the outbuildings and the bridge down in Bumblebee and the Armory and all over the state of Arizona. Men are put to work by the WPA, and men and women and families are tried to get through the Depression, and then the World War starts. They tried to start the ball clubs up before World War II, but there's still some barnstorming, but things are tight. But as soon as the war is over, what happens? You see local boosters, and during World War II, spring training was limited to being as close to home as possible. A lot of those ball players went into the war. There wasn't spring training on the coasts in Florida and California during the war. But here we are, 1946. What are our town boosters doing in Arizona? They're betting on baseball right away. Come and see the Chicago Cubs and the St. Louis Browns. The Browns would train in San Bernardino and Yuma, and later would become the Orioles and train in Scottsdale. Here is Phoenix Mini Stadium, 1947. 1947, as most of you know, is one of the most important years in the history of professional baseball in the United States. It's the year that Jackie Robinson crosses the color line in baseball. The Dodgers, their spring training is in Havana, Cuba that year, and Jackie Robinson is assigned to the Montreal Expos, a minor league team of the Dodgers, before he's brought up that April and breaks the color line for the Dodgers. Now, in further research, the Indians and the Giants, Horace Stoneham and Bill Veeck, decide that they're going to flee Florida. They're not going to go to California. They decide Arizona as a new frontier, right? If you're the only game in town, you don't have to share as much box office, right? These guys, it's after the war. So Horace Stoneham and Bill Veeck, they want to flee the oppressive Jim Crow of Florida. They're watching what the Dodgers are doing, and they bring their spring training to Arizona in 1947. Now, Larry Doby does not come to Tucson in 1947. He's pulled up to the Cleveland Indians in July 1947, and Larry Doby breaks the color barrier for the American League that summer. But in 1948, Larry Doby will come to Arizona, and the Cleveland Indians in Tucson, again, a team that should never have left Arizona, and when they did leave Arizona, like the next year, their brand new stadium in Florida in Homestead was destroyed by a hurricane. It's too bad I think the New York Giants, and there's the Senators, they start playing at a new ballpark. Riverside is given up, and they build Phoenix Municipal Stadium down on Mojave and Central. In 1951, an anecdote, my father was a New York Yankees fan. My father was born in New York and was sent to Orem School in 1945, but he always remained a Yankees fan. And in 1951, the Yankees and the Giants traded spring training locations. Now that's a story for another day, except for the fact you have to know that Del Webb, sometime after World War II, after building the Flamingo Hotel for Bugsy Siegel in Las Vegas, became one of the public owners of the New York Yankees. And he brought the Yankees with Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle to Phoenix in 1951. And that was where they played, right there at Phoenix Community. Here's Larry Doby. Larry Doby played with the Cleveland Indians down at High Corbett Field, which started in Randolph Field as Randolph Field. It is still one of the oldest ballparks in the state and deserves to have a team every spring. Here's Phoenix Community in the 1940s. Cleveland Indians in 1947. And let's talk about minor league baseball as we conclude this afternoon's conversation about professional baseball in Arizona. So one of the underlying stories of baseball in Arizona that should not be overlooked is that Arizona plays a major role in the internationalization of baseball. There is an international league that's very famous up on the Canadian-American border, very old league. But Arizona, in the Arizona-Texas League of 1931, Nogales joined the league. Not Nogales, Arizona, Nogales, Sonora, 1931. And after World War II, the Arizona-Texas League soon quickly expanded, and they were crazy for baseball south of the border. And in 1950, the Juarez Indios won the league. And the final name of the league, starting all the way back to that Arizona State League, was the Arizona-Mexico League, and it folds in 1958. Now, during the 1950s, we have a lot of great ball players coming to Arizona, playing for the New York Giants. Willie Mays is here, the Chicago Cubs, the Baltimore Orioles, the Boston Red Sox, and all the small towns like Scottsdale and Mesa start saying we need to be in on the baseball boosterism. We're building new hotels. It's the new era of America after World War II, and the new suburban towns of Maricopa County, they are betting on baseball. Now, 1866, a ball club is formed in Prescott. 2026, we are in an era in which this is one of the biggest economic engines in the state of Arizona. We have a $19 billion economy based around tourism, close to $1 billion in baseball. Scottsdale Stadium where the Diamondbacks play, and we come all the way back to town baseball here in Arizona. Fort Whipple is still has great history here in Prescott in baseball. We know that the Dodgers, the Giants, 707, and TV change everything for minor league baseball. So by 1958 and the late 50s, we see the collapse and reorganization of minor league teams, and those small town teams can't handle, everyone's staying inside now. We've got air conditioning and TV, we've got the Giants and the Dodgers on the West Coast, and so there's reorganization. And Phoenix does, because the Giants now have been doing all their spring training in Arizona, they decide to bring their Minnesota team to play in Phoenix. And so you get a AAA ball club in Phoenix, and the Giants become, if you talk to old Phoenicians going back, people who are baseball fans, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, some people listen to the Dodgers on the radio, but they were Giants fans because that was the team in town. It's like the Sun Devils were their first football team, and the Suns were their first basketball team, but those the Firebirds, and we were talking about how you got season tickets in 1997, 1998. A good friend of mine called me and said, Stuart, get your name in with the Firebirds. Buy yourself some season tickets in 1997, and you'll get in that top list of season tickets for the Diamondbacks. And so we have bet on baseball here in Arizona for a long time. It's in our DNA as a state, and I hope that someday that we will go down and recruit some professional teams during spring training to come up here and give us an exhibition game somewhere in the Quad City, just like we should have well over 100 years ago. Thank you all very much. And I'd love to answer any questions you might have. Yes, Bailey.
Not so much a question, but I just want to bring it back more mindfully, especially in Tucson. My husband is a native Tucsonian, and he grew up on the Tucson side property, and he was really disappointed and upset when that team left, and then ultimately when spring training left entirely Tucson. He said it not only affected the community, it affected their economy too. It actually really hurt Tucson to lose all the spring training teams and then even their minor league baseball teams.
Yeah.
But I was doing some quick research, and apparently last year they now have the Tucson Swirl.
Oh. Are they playing in that fall? Are they playing in that fall league? That.
I think so, yeah. But I think it's, to your point, there's a part of that you have major league baseball, but I think it's minor league because just as important. I would be more for it because they're not community.
That's right. Sir, you had a question in the back.
Yeah, what's the history of Phoenix Municipal Stadium?
I can't speak to where they played baseball before Riverside Park opened in the late teens or late, aughts. And then that was torn down and they built Phoenix Municipal Stadium at Mojave and Central. And I do know that before Riverside Park, there was a racetrack down on the river, 1880s, 1890s, where the county fair, the state fair was held. And I'm looking over here at Nancy Burgess because she might know a little bit about where maybe the earliest they would have played baseball where they had, the state fair and the county fair. Then after World War II, and they still played. The Giants play down in Phoenix Muni on Central and Mojave. They built the Scottsdale Stadium, and the first tenant there were the former St. Louis Browns, the Baltimore Orioles. The Browns have been playing in Yuma and San Bernardino. Then they brought in the Red Sox. And then I think the Cubs played for a while in Scottsdale, and then Hohokam Field in Mesa was built, the original Hohokam. And the Giants, frustrated with this tired park down on Central, built a beautiful facility in Casa Grande with a swimming pool in the shape of a baseball and a spa in the shape of a baseball. And it was supposed to be with a hotel. So their players and fans could all come to Casa Grande and enjoy this big resort while enjoying spring baseball. And then Phoenix Muni, I'd have to look up when they built Phoenix Muni down on Van Buren, where ASU is playing now, but I believe the first team to play there were the Oakland A's. So the A's played there for a very long time. And then, like Apache Junction, they had the Colt 45s, which became the Houston Astros early on. You had, of course, the Indians were playing in Tucson. There was the only team down there for a very long time. And then, let's see, Tucson, the Cubs, and then the Giants, when they came back, they settled in Scottsdale.
And I had the thrill to be a top vendor at Phoenix for Giants.
Oh my gosh.
And my first autograph, the vendors were allowed to get to the players before the general public and get autographs. And I'll never forget my first autograph.
How about that? I love that. And then I don't know when Tempe Diablo was built, but once the Angels enter the league in the 1960s, for years, Gene Autry practices in Palm Springs and Yuma, and then the Angels come up and they're practicing in Tempe before the Mariners arrive. So it's very interesting to try to figure out. I think it would have been pretty exciting to have followed the Cubs, and you had to take a ferry out to go see the Cubs play out on Catalina Island. I mean, I told, you talked about the story of like you say, William Wrigley owned Catalina Island. Like, what? Oh yeah, it was his island. And he decided that's where his team should play, and he was also an investor in the Arizona Biltmore. Nancy.
We always went to Muni Stadium in the 70s to watch spring training. Never went to professional games. Always went to spring training. And it was fun. Always fun.
It's a phenomenon. And And I think the Firebirds, if you went to any of the Firebird games later on, they were one of the first businesses in the Phoenix area sometime in the 80s that discovered misters. Because if you ever went to a Firebirds game without misters, in July, or June, you're just baking. I mean, those aluminum benches, you just absorb the heat, right? You go in there after the game, you're just drinking beer to stay hydrated, and popcorn to keep the salt in you. And maybe the seventh inning, there's a slight wind, and it's 99 degrees. Like, oh, it's finally cooled down. You had a question in the green?
Just a comment. You probably know this, but U of A now plays baseball at high court.
Oh, that's fantastic. And ASU's at Phoenix Muni.
Yeah, so it was a brilliant decision on their part because it's a wonderful stadium.
Yeah.
And now it was off-site from campus, so they still beer and do all that. It's pretty cool.
And the tradition of playing in that great ballpark. Ma'am, you had a question too.
You already told me you don't have a minor league team
Here.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would behoove our, even just to have the B squads come up here for an exhibition game.
You love minor league ball. You used to athlete ball with your team minor league ball. You lived in Orange for a while and our team.
Oh,
It's that move here that people wanted to see it. And so that we had a fun game and we did some great time with sand
sand crabs,
crabs.
I love that. And if you ever, there's a catalog out there I love called Ebbets Field catalog. And my colleague Sally Jackson today, I walked out of the house this morning without for Christmas, Santa brought me a 1939 Phoenix Senators baseball cap from Ebbets Field. I should have worn it today. But they have minor league teams and jerseys. And I bought one with the last name of Rosebrook. I have a jersey. It's the Rosebuds, and it's a Texas minor league team. Lone Star across the back. So, yes, sir.
Economic impact in Arizona for baseball?
I got that. I printed that out and brought it down with me here. Let me find it. I was so excited about my idea of us singing "Take Me Out to the Ballpark." So, Arizona Cactus League, 10 ballpark with 15 major league teams. 2025, $764 million was generated by the Cactus League. The study found that visitor spending reached $378 million. That means just spending. 1,695,480 fans in 2025. Now you got and the season looks forward to including World Baseball Classic teams in our facilities this year in 2026. 6,182 jobs, $32.1 million in taxes for the state. Betting on baseball. The boosters of Arizona made a pretty good bet, I think.
My wife wanted to know what kangaroo.
Well, the ball players, kind of like cowboys, right? What were the most expensive things you owned as a working cowboy? Your saddle, your hat, your boots, your gun, your tools of your trade, your spurs, your chaps, your bit, right? Well, for ball players, they didn't make a lot of money, and they had very, very specific rules on how much money, D class, C class, that you could spend on your players. So kangaroo leather could not be worn out. Cow leather, you'd wear holes in your cleats. Kangaroo leather would last season after season, and you would not have to replace your cleats. That's why Thornton Lee was so proud of those kangaroo cleats up on the shelf in his house. Thought that's pretty exotic for 1929, right? We think we're so sophisticated in 2026. Thornton Lee's playing D-class baseball in Arizona on scratch diamonds without grass on any of the fields in his kangaroo cleats. And driving in a Cadillac road car, and you got paid extra money if you drove. Well, thank you all very much for being here. It's a great honor to be able to talk to you today about baseball. Great, and thanks for being here.